Thank you, Agnes, for your kind introduction, and so many thanks to you for inviting me to come to talk to you about the experience of the National Pay and Equalities Negotiators when we meet with UCEA, who are the employers' representatives. It's really striking to me that it does feel, who was it, Kavita, that said that this is about the landscape of the future of higher education? It absolutely is. And I agree with you, Agnes. It's a critical moment. It's a defining moment for our union. What we have happening here, as Rhiannon said earlier on, she didn't reference the prison educators, but they were on strike earlier this year. So what we're looking at is the prison educators who had to take industrial action just to get, and they work under some of the worst conditions of any of us who work in post-16 education. Now we have the FE colleges out taking industrial action, not for the first time in the past couple of years. Jo Grady was on the picket line today at one of the colleges. She'll surely be, or she was at the RCA. I can't remember. She's been all over London the last couple of days in the college and then the Royal College of Art industrial actions, because what we are looking at is a state of play where post-16 education is going to struggle for its future. So there is a lot of work. I can tell you there's a lot of work going on at head office to prepare for the ballot. There is an assumption, and I think it's an assumption based on good intelligence, that there is so much dissatisfaction amongst workers in HE that we will take industrial action. But what we need, as we're all talking about here now today, is to get the ballot out. And a little bit of what I don't understand is why, and forgive me, I've got some prepared notes, I don't normally do this, but since 2009, did you know that according to the government's and the employers' own statistics, our pay has eroded by 17.6%. So in the last decade and a little more, we are 17% worse off than we were. So forget about catch up and keep up, which is the pay claim. At the same time, across the sector, across the workforce in this country, in the same period, pay lifted by 28.7%. What is it about our commitment to our jobs? What is it about our dedication to our jobs that allows us to have this sustained attacks on our pay? Wasn't it last year we had a 0%? They call it pay uplift, by the way, in the UCEA meetings. That's not my definition of something lifting, but in any event, that's a pay cut, isn't it? Because of inflation. So I found out when I was doing some work for my own branch that we have a 22% gender pay gap in my institution. 22%, that's one of the highest in the sector. That's Bournemouth University, by the way, where we do a lot of work on gender pay gap, but clearly not enough. We don't know what the pay gap is for disabled members because purportedly there isn't enough data. And of course we do know the ethnicity pay gaps, don't we? Because they're just going to reflect what's going on in the rest of the country, in the rest of the workforce. We know about spiralling workloads. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know, am I? We know about spiralling workloads and the absolute exploitation of casualised workers. So in the meetings with the Universities and College Employers Association representatives, as much as we tell them, if Vicky Blake was here now, our president, she would tell you how resistant they are to addressing casualisation. They shouted at us in fury when we said 0 hours contracts have to end. You know, enough of the Uberisation of higher education. They didn't believe us that people who work in HE are using food banks. And until we gave examples, they laughed at us when we talked about people working in higher education sofa surfing because they're working in 2 or 3 different institutions over a working week or a month or a semester. They're very hard-hearted about that. And we've got the RCA, as Rhys said earlier, Royal College out in doing industrial action now. So what we need to do is us negotiators have you in the room with us when we're next talking to the UCEA representatives. And how we get you in the room with us is, as Agnes said earlier, numbers. It's numbers of members who vote in the industrial action, and of course numbers of members who vote for the industrial action. I can answer some of the questions about the strategy, but like Rhiannon said, some of it's embargoed. The important point that I can't stress enough is that when you see a wave after wave, is the expression, isn't it, of prison work, prison educators, FE members, HE members, casualised members, all taking action, the employers have to listen. of course the employers have to listen, but we believe the negotiators, from noises off that are being discussed at headquarters, head office, the government will listen. They will have to listen, because what you're talking about is all of post-16 education over a particular period of time, what, the last year or so, all taking industrial action over our terms and conditions. That cannot be ignored. It's powerful in the room with the UCEA negotiators. It's powerful as a message to send to the government. I don't know about at Nottingham, but I do know in other branches I've spoken to, and for sure in my own branch. So Bournemouth University was one of the few post-92s to get over the threshold for 2019-20, because we did get the vote out on the basis that we followed Harriet Watt's model, by the way, which is very effective. And then there's lots of advice coming from head office now as to how to do that. But that we stood on the picket line, that we happened to be on a fairly main road in our main campus where there's lots of traffic, buses, lorries, cars, all sorts of transport going past were honking their horns for us. The noise was so loud that in one of the buildings near the roundabout where we were positioned, people couldn't work. So eventually the Vice Chancellor and the Chief Operating Officer came out to talk to us. And it was the first time, we didn't have good industrial relations at that point either. They were barely talking to the union. It was the first time they'd ever turned up at one of our picket lines, because I've been there quite a while and we've had strikes in the past, haven't we? And our industrial relations with them now, I can't say that they've improved to the point where we're friends, but we have bi-weekly joint consultation and negotiation meetings. Never had that before, they were quarterly. We're in the room, we're equal partners, we're working together, to work through all of the conditions we're working in right now, and they are listening, and we are winning for our members. Really good risk assessments for working on campus, really good arrangements when we were working online, to the point where if a member of staff lived we're in Dorset, so if a member of staff lived in a location where their Wi-Fi was so problematic that they couldn't get online, they were still paid. If they had childcare responsibilities and their children's schools were closed, as a lot of them were, they were still paid. There's a whole raft of really good gains we made for our members because we took industrial action, and it certainly draws a line in the sand in terms of how our employers relate to us. If we can achieve that nationally, then it's a complete shift in the landscape. I think it was Kavita that talked about the landscape. It's a complete shift in the landscape for higher education. So we have to get the vote out in as many numbers as we can, because, as I've already said, that puts you, every single one of you, in the room with me and the other negotiators when we're talking to UCEA. And just on the point of whether these industrial actions have worked and whether our negotiations and our threat of industrial action has worked. 3 years ago, the employers representatives told us we only negotiate on pay. That's the terms of our national GINCHES, it's called national joint consultation. We only negotiate on pay. We haven't got any more remit. And we said, is that right? You need to talk to us about workload and casualisation and the gender and equalities pay gaps. And they said, oh, not our remit. And we said, well, it is now. And this year we included in the equalities pay gap disabled members pay gap. They are shifting more towards the demands that we're making in our headline claim. That's because we've taken industrial action. That's because we have said no more. We won't tolerate this anymore. When we argued with them, when we made our argument this year about the below inflationary pay rise they were offering us, they came back with a long list of the reasons why. And the interesting thing, just trying to remind myself who they are. So there's 5 education unions, 5 campus unions in those negotiations. So there's UCU, Unison Unite, GMB and EIS, which is a Scottish union, Education Institute of Scotland. All of us who were there have been there for more, none of us were brand new negotiators. It was Justine Mercer, who's our vice president, her second year. So she's seen these stories before. As they were listing the reasons why we can't have a pay rise this year, the employers can't afford it. There are universities that just simply aren't in a financial position to pay their workers. Well, then it's not a university, is it? If you can't pay your staff, a living wage, these are the demands of some of the other unions, then how are you functioning as an organisation? Anyway, there was a point at which one of the Unison negotiators, I believe it was, said, Well, are you going to throw into this long list the sinking of the Titanic? Because we've heard this all before. You're not telling us anything new here. And so they came up with COVID. Well, then, so Sean Wallace, who's a bit of a whiz with numbers, very quickly did some, I don't know what he was doing, whichever device he was using, came back and said, but have an institution saved across the sector. And he's cited the figures for the money that universities across the sector have saved during the COVID period when we were working online. Initial costs of setting up online, but after that, all sorts of costs saved. So there is no, the sector is swimming in reserves. There is no actual reason why we can't have a decent pay rise. Those of you who aren't as exercised about pay rise as some others, and don't forget on the very lower pay spines, no one's richly rewarded, right? Level 7, grade 7 in our institution, people are not richly rewarded for the debt that they've gone into because you have to have a PhD to work in HE now. I know you know all these arguments. The point is, we cannot continue to work with the workloads we're dealing with. We can't stand by and let our colleagues and peers be exploited through casualisation and the equalities pay gap. They're insulting. So if you have any questions, I'm very happy to hang around and answer them. But my plea to you is, please vote. Please encourage your colleagues and other members to vote. Yes, recruit more members, but be mindful there's an slight issue there around getting their ballot papers to them. I'm sure you know these things, your exec committee. Put your negotiators in the room with your weight and your voice behind us. We can win much more than you think we can if we're in the room with a powerful voice.